Commander Zethkar stood before the massive viewing screen in his ship's command center. His yellow eyes studied the blue and green planet that hung in the darkness of space before him. Earth looked peaceful from this distance, but he knew that would change very soon. The reptilian commander was 7 feet tall with dark green scales covering his muscular body. Sharp claws extended from his fingers as he touched the control panel. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. They were all members of the Vorthak Empire, the most powerful military force in this part of the galaxy. "Report," Zethkar ordered in his deep voice. Lieutenant Crixatal stepped forward, holding a data pad in his clawed hands. "Sir, our scouts have finished studying the human homeworld. The analysis is complete." Zethkar turned away from the screen to face his second-in-command. "Tell me what we found." Crixatal looked at his notes. "The humans are even weaker than we expected, sir. Their weapons are simple projectile systems. They still use gunpowder and metal bullets. No energy weapons, no plasma cannons, nothing advanced." "What about their space defenses?" Zethkar asked. "Very poor, sir. They have a few small stations orbiting their planet, maybe 20 patrol ships total. Nothing that can stop our fleet." Crixtal paused and made a sound that was like laughter. "They don't even have shields on most of their ships." Zethkar nodded. This was exactly what he had expected. In his long career as a military commander, he had conquered 17 different worlds. Each time the pattern was the same. The Vorthak would arrive with their superior technology and firepower. The local species would realize they had no chance of winning. They would surrender quickly to avoid unnecessary death. What about their military structure? Zethkar continued his questions. "Chaotic, sir. They have hundreds of different nations on their planet. Each one has its own army. They spend more time fighting each other than working together. When we attack, they won't be able to coordinate a proper defense." This was even better news. Zethkar had faced unified planetary governments before. They were much harder to defeat than divided worlds where the inhabitants wasted their strength fighting among themselves. "Their psychological profile?" he asked. Crixtal scrolled through more data. "Interesting weaknesses, sir. They form strong emotional bonds with each other. They keep small animals as pets and treat them like family members. They show extreme attachment to their young. Our psychologists believe we can use these bonds against them." "How? Threaten their families, their pets, their children? They will surrender to protect the ones they care about. It's a common weakness among primitive species." Zethkar walked back to the viewing screen. Through his military career, he had learned that every species had weaknesses. The Korthans were too proud and would fight hopeless battles rather than retreat. The Villians were greedy and could be bought with promises of wealth. The Deltans loved their art and culture more than their lives. Humans, it seemed, loved each other more than themselves. This made them weak. "Sir," another crew member called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Empire." "Put it through." The viewing screen changed to show the face of Admiral Thekmor, Zethkar's superior officer. The Admiral's scales were darker than Zethkar's, showing his greater age and experience. "Commander," the Admiral said, "what is your status?" "Ready to begin the invasion, sir. The humans pose no significant threat." "Good, the Emperor is pleased with your progress. How long do you estimate the conquest will take?" Zethkar considered this carefully. His past conquests had taken anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on how quickly the enemy surrendered. 1 week at most, sir. Possibly less if they surrender after our opening attack." "Excellent. The Empire needs this world's resources quickly. Don't waste time with prolonged battles." "Understood, sir." The transmission ended and the screen returned to showing Earth. Zethkar felt confident about the mission ahead. He had studied human history through their own broadcasts and communications. They were a young species, barely out of their home solar system. They had fought many wars among themselves but never faced a threat from space. "Sir," Crixtal said, "the fleet is in position and ready for your orders." Zethkar looked around his command center. 50 ships waited behind his flagship, each one more powerful than anything humans had ever built. His soldiers were trained warriors who had fought across the galaxy. Their weapons could level cities in minutes. "Begin the approach," he ordered. "Take us to their outer system." "I want them to see us coming." The fleet moved forward through space toward Earth. Zethkar expected the humans would detect them soon. Their primitive sensors would show the massive Vorthak ships approaching. Then would come the panic, the desperate attempts to communicate, the eventual realization that resistance was useless. He had seen it all before. "Sir," The communications officer reported. We're detecting increased radio traffic from the human homeworld. They know we're here. What are they saying? Emergency broadcast to their military forces. They're calling it a code red situation. All military personnel are being recalled to active duty. Zethkar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. The humans were already afraid. Good. Fear would make them more likely to surrender quickly. As the fleet continued its approach, Zethkar thought about what would happen next. First, they would destroy the human space defenses to show their superior power. Then they would demand surrender. If the humans were smart, they would give up immediately. If they were foolish enough to resist, the bombardment would begin. A few destroyed cities would convince them that fighting was hopeless. Within days, the human leaders would contact him to discuss terms of surrender. The Vorthak Empire would gain another world, and Zethkar would add another victory to his record. It was a simple, predictable process. Time to outer system? He asked. 2 hours, sir. Zethkar settled into his command chair and waited. Soon he would meet the humans face to face. He wondered if they would show the same cowardice he had seen in other species, or if they would provide at least some small challenge. Either way, their fate was already decided. The Vorthak Empire always won in the end. The red planet Mars grew larger on the viewing screen as Zethkar's fleet moved deeper into the human solar system. His sensors showed 3 small human ships approaching from the planet's direction. They were tiny compared to his massive warships, like insects flying toward a giant. "Sir, we have incoming vessels," reported the tactical officer. 3 human patrol ships. "They're moving to intercept us." Zethkar studied the display showing the approaching ships. They were crude-looking things made of metal and ceramic, with simple rocket engines pushing them through space. No energy shields, no advanced armor, just basic hull plating. "Are they trying to communicate with us?" he asked. "Yes, sir. They're sending messages on multiple frequencies. Audio and visual transmissions. Let me hear what they're saying." The bridge speakers crackled to life with a human voice. It was clear and strong, without any fear. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiant. You are entering restricted space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." Zethkar was mildly surprised. The human didn't sound scared at all. Most species would be terrified when faced with a fleet of 50 warships. This Captain Morrison sounded like he was giving orders to an equal. "Open a channel," Zethkar commanded. "Channel open, sir." "Captain Morrison," Zethkar said in perfect English. His species had learned the language from intercepted human transmissions. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire. You will stand down immediately and return to your base. This system now belongs to the Empire." There was a pause before Morrison replied. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Commander. This is human space and you're not welcome here. Turn your ships around and leave and no one gets hurt." The bridge crew looked at each other in amazement. Zethkar himself couldn't believe what he was hearing. This human was actually threatening them. 3 tiny ships against 50 massive warships, and the human was telling them to leave. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar said slowly, "look at your tactical display. Count my ships. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now and I will spare your lives." "Yeah, I can count," Morrison replied. 50 ships against 3. Pretty bad odds." There was another pause. "For you." Zethkar's claws extended in anger. No one had ever spoken to him this way. Lesser species always recognize their place when faced with superior force. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw, Captain. After that, I will destroy your ships." "Counter-offer," Morrison said. "You have 30 seconds to turn around and get out of our system. After that, we're going to make you regret coming here." The channel went dead. On the tactical display, the 3 human ships spread out into an attack formation. They were actually preparing to fight. "Sir," the tactical officer said, "what are your orders?" Zethkar stared at the display. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered anything like this. 3 ships against 50, and they wanted to fight. It was either the bravest thing he had ever seen or the most foolish. "Launch fighters," he ordered. "Let's teach them about reality." A squadron of Vorthak fighters launched from the carrier ships. They were sleek, fast craft with powerful energy weapons. 12 fighters against 3 human ships should end this quickly. The battle began immediately. The human ships fired their primitive projectile weapons, while the Vorthak fighters responded with energy blasts. Zethkar watched the display, expecting to see the human ships destroyed within minutes. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human ships fought like nothing he had ever seen. They didn't try to retreat when outnumbered. They didn't panic when their shields failed. They just kept fighting. The ship called Defiant took heavy damage early in the fight. Its hull was torn open and atmosphere was venting into space. Any reasonable commander would surrender at that point. Instead, Morrison pushed his damaged ship directly toward Zethkar's escort vessel. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the damaged human ship." "Put it through." Captain Morrison's face appeared on the screen. His uniform was torn and blood was running down his face, but his eyes were still fierce and determined. "Commander Zethkar," Morrison said, "I want you to remember something. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, Earth. I've got a wife named Carol and 2 kids, Billy and Sarah. They're waiting for me to come home." "Your point, Captain?" Zethkar asked. "My point is that you just made the biggest mistake of your life. You picked the wrong species to mess with. We don't surrender. We don't quit. And we sure as hell don't forget." On the tactical display, the Defiant was now on a collision course with the escort vessel. Morrison was going to ram his ship into Zethkar's forces. "All ships, this is Morrison," the captain continued his transmission. "Get word back to Earth. Tell them what happened here. Tell them the aliens are coming, and tell them we gave them a hell of a fight." The Defiant struck the escort vessel at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a small sun. Both ships were destroyed instantly, along with Captain Jake Morrison and his entire crew. But the sacrifice wasn't meaningless. The other 2 human ships used the confusion to escape. They jumped to hyperspace and disappeared, carrying news of the invasion back to Earth. Zethkar stared at the wreckage floating in space. He had won the battle, but something felt wrong. The humans hadn't fought like any enemy he had faced before. They hadn't shown fear or desperation. They had shown something else entirely. "Sir," Lieutenant Crixtall said quietly, "shall we continue the advance?" Zethkar was silent for a long moment. He thought about Morrison's final words. The human had spoken about his family, about remembering. There had been something in his voice that Zethkar didn't recognize. "Yes," he finally said. "Continue to Earth, but double the fighter patrols. And send word to the fleet. These humans may be more dangerous than we thought." As the Vorthak fleet moved toward the blue planet, Zethkar couldn't shake the image of Morrison's face from his mind. The human had known he was going to die, but he hadn't begged or tried to bargain. He had simply made sure his death would mean something. It was disturbing in a way Zethkar couldn't explain. But surely it was just random madness. When faced with the full might of the Vorthak fleet, the humans would see reason and surrender, wouldn't they? Earth filled the viewing screen now, beautiful and blue against the black of space. Zethkar could see the continents clearly, and the lights of human cities on the night side of the planet. It looked peaceful, but he knew that would change in the next few hours. "Fleet status report," he ordered. "All ships in position, sir," replied Crixtall. "Ground assault troops ready for deployment. Orbital bombardment systems charged and ready." Zethkar nodded. The plan was simple. First, they would destroy the human space stations and remaining patrol ships. Then they would demand surrender. If the humans refused, they would begin bombing major cities until the leaders agreed to terms. "Begin the attack," he commanded. The space battle lasted only 20 minutes. The human orbital stations fought bravely, but they were no match for Vorthak firepower. Their primitive weapons couldn't penetrate the alien shields, while the energy cannons tore through human hulls like paper. But even as their stations exploded around them, the human defenders kept fighting. Every ship fought until it was destroyed. No one surrendered, no one retreated. They died at their posts, firing until the end. "Send the surrender demand," Zethkar ordered once the space defenses were eliminated. The message was broadcast to every radio and television station on Earth. Zethkar appeared on screens worldwide, his reptilian form towering over the human population. "People of Earth," he began, "I am Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire. Your space defenses have been destroyed. Your planet is now under our control. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or we will begin orbital bombardment of your major cities. Choose wisely." The response came 30 minutes later from the United Nations building in New York. A gray-haired human man appeared on screen, wearing a dark suit. His name appeared as Secretary General Robert Chen. "Commander Zethkar," Chen said calmly, "on behalf of all humanity, I have one response to your demand. He paused and looked directly into the camera. Go to hell. The transmission ended. Zethkar stared at the blank screen in disbelief. They had actually refused. Even after seeing their defenses destroyed, even after his show of overwhelming force, they had refused to surrender. Begin orbital bombardment, he ordered. Target military installations first. Maybe they'll reconsider after we destroy a few of their armies. The bombardment began with military bases around the world. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning installations into craters of molten glass. Zethkar expected this display of power to break human resistance. Instead, it seemed to make them fight harder. Sir, the tactical officer reported, we're detecting massive military mobilization across the planet. They're not surrendering. They're preparing for war. Impossible, Zethkar said. Show me. The main screen displayed feeds from around Earth. Every nation was mobilizing its forces. Soldiers were moving to defensive positions. Civilians were evacuating cities, but there were no signs of panic or surrender. Deploy ground forces, Zethkar ordered. Land troops in major population centers. Take hostages if necessary. The first ground assault targeted New York City. Zethkar watched the battle feeds as his dropships descended through the atmosphere. The humans had prepared defensive positions throughout the city, turning every street into a potential battlefield. The fighting was unlike anything in Zethkar's experience. Human soldiers used tactics that made no military sense. They would sacrifice valuable positions to rescue wounded comrades. They would break formation to help civilians escape. They fought harder when outnumbered, not weaker. But it was one particular battle that truly confused him. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was defending a hospital in Manhattan with only 30 soldiers. Zethkar's ground commander had surrounded the building with 200 warriors. Victory was certain. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the Vorthak commander, broadcast through loudspeakers. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender now and your soldiers will be spared. Rodriguez's reply came back immediately. We've got wounded people in this hospital who can't be moved. Kids, old people, sick people. We're not leaving them. Then you will all die for nothing. No, Rodriguez said. We'll die for something. That's the difference between us and you. The battle for the hospital lasted 6 hours. Rodriguez's small force inflicted heavy casualties on Zethkar's troops. They used every advantage they could find, turning the building itself into a weapon. When the Vorthak forces finally broke through their defenses, Rodriguez made her final stand in the hospital lobby. Zethkar watched through a soldier's helmet camera as Rodriguez stood alone, wounded and surrounded. She was young, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair and determined eyes. She could have surrendered and lived. Instead, she triggered explosives that brought down part of the building. She killed herself and 47 Vorthak warriors, buying time for the final evacuation of patients to be completed through the back exits. Similar scenes played out across the globe. In Tokyo, a fighter pilot named Ben Hughes led a suicide squadron against Zethkar's orbital platforms. His small ships couldn't damage the massive alien vessels, but Hughes found a way. He and his pilots flew their aircraft directly into the shield generators, overloading them with the impact explosions. In London, Major Lisa Carter organized civilian resistance cells. Ordinary humans with hunting rifles and homemade explosives turned the city into a maze of ambushes and traps. Every block cost Zethkar's forces time and casualties, but the most disturbing part wasn't the military resistance. It was how the civilians behaved. Zethkar had expected them to pressure their leaders to surrender when the bombing started. Instead, they seemed to grow more determined. Families stayed together and helped each other. Strangers shared food and shelter. Children as young as 12 carried messages for the resistance. Elderly people too old to fight provided intelligence and supplies. Sir, Krikstal reported. Casualty reports from the ground forces. Go ahead. We've lost 15% of our landing troops in the first day. The humans are fighting in ways our tactical computers can't predict. They're not following standard military doctrine. Zethkar studied the battle reports flooding in from around the planet. Every engagement told the same story. The humans were outgunned and outnumbered, but they kept fighting. More importantly, they weren't fighting as individuals. They were fighting as one unified force. For the first time since beginning the invasion, Zethkar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest: uncertainty. Increase bombardment intensity, he ordered. Target civilian areas if necessary. Break their will to fight. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. Put it through. The face that appeared on screen was that of an elderly human woman. She had white hair and kind eyes, but her voice was strong and clear. This is President Margaret Thompson, speaking for the United States of America and all of Earth. You came here thinking we would be easy to conquer. You thought wrong. Every city you bomb, every soldier you kill, every family you destroy only makes us stronger. We will never surrender. We will never give up. And we will never forget what you've done to our world. You want a war? You've got one. The transmission ended. Zethkar stared at the screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. These humans were behaving like no species he had ever encountered. They seemed to get stronger under pressure, more united in the face of overwhelming odds. For the first time in his military career, Zethkar began to wonder if he had made a mistake. The battle for Chicago had been raging for 3 days when Zethkar made his decision. He would lead the ground assault personally. The human resistance in the city was stronger than expected, and his commanders were requesting additional support. More importantly, Zethkar needed to understand what made these humans fight so differently from every other species he had conquered. He stood in the cargo bay of his personal dropship, checking his armor one final time. His personal guard of elite warriors stood behind him, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Through the small windows, he could see the burning city below. "Sir," his pilot reported through the intercom, "landing zone secured. We're going down." The dropship descended through smoke and debris toward Grant Park in the center of Chicago. Intelligence reports showed a group of human defenders had taken position there, refusing to retreat despite being surrounded. This would be a perfect opportunity to study human tactics up close. The ship landed with a heavy thud on the scorched grass. Zethkar activated the rear door and stepped out into the smoky air of the human city. The smell of burning buildings and gunpowder filled his nostrils. Around the park, the bodies of both human and Vorthak soldiers showed the intensity of the fighting. Destroyed vehicles and weapon craters marked where battles had been fought. In the distance, Zethkar could hear the ongoing sounds of combat as his forces continued to push deeper into the city. "Report," he ordered his ground commander. "Captain Vextar. Sir, we have approximately 20 humans trapped in the park center. They've taken position around some kind of monument. We've been trying to dislodge them for 6 hours. Only 20 humans are holding up an entire company of my soldiers." "Yes, sir." "They're well positioned and they refuse to surrender. Every time we advance, they inflict casualties on our forces." Zethkar studied the tactical display on his wrist computer. The human position was surrounded with no escape route. They had no heavy weapons and limited ammunition. Any logical military force would have surrendered hours ago. "I want to see them for myself," he said. They moved carefully through the damaged park, using cover to avoid sniper fire. As they got closer to the human position, Zethkar could see the enemy more clearly through his helmet's zoom function. The humans had formed a defensive circle around a large bronze statue of some historical figure. But what surprised Zethkar wasn't their tactical position. It was who was defending it, sir, Vextar said quietly. Our intelligence was wrong about their composition. Zethkar could see what he meant. The human force wasn't just trained soldiers. There were civilians mixed in with the military personnel. He spotted an elderly man with gray hair holding an ancient hunting rifle. A young woman who appeared to be a medic was treating wounded behind the lines. There were even teenagers who should have been evacuated with the other civilians. At the center of the group stood a man in a torn military uniform. The name tag on his chest read Cooper. This had to be Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper, the unit commander his intelligence files mentioned. Have you tried to negotiate with them? Zethkar asked. Several times, sir. They refuse all offers. Zethkar activated his external speakers and stepped into the open where the humans could see him. Immediately, several weapons turned in his direction, but no one fired. They were waiting to hear what he had to say. Staff Sergeant Cooper, Zethkar called out. I am Commander Zethkar. I wish to speak with you. A pause, then Cooper's voice came back. I'm listening. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Your city is falling, your military is defeated. Why do you continue to fight? Because this is our home, Cooper replied simply. You can't just take it from us. Look around you, Sergeant. Your people are dying for nothing. Surrender now and I will guarantee their safety. Safety? Cooper's voice rose. You've been bombing our cities for 3 days. You've killed thousands of innocent people. You call that safety? Zethkar was quiet for a moment. The human had a point, but it was irrelevant. The bombing will stop when you surrender. The choice is yours. The choice was made when you decided to invade our world. We didn't start this fight, but we're sure as hell going to finish it. This wasn't going as Zethkar expected. He tried a different approach. Sergeant, you have civilians with you. Old people, young people. They don't need to die today. You're right, Cooper said. They don't need to die. But they're here anyway. You know why? Because they chose to be here. Nobody forced them. They could have run, but they stayed to fight beside us. Zethkar looked more carefully at the human defenders. The old man with the hunting rifle was positioned to cover the medic. The teenagers were passing ammunition to the soldiers. None of them looked afraid despite facing certain death. I don't understand your species, Zethkar said honestly. Any rational beings would have surrendered by now. Maybe that's your problem, Cooper replied. You think this is about being rational. It's not. It's about being human. Attack! Zethkar ordered his troops. Take them alive if possible. The final battle began. Zethkar's warriors advanced from all directions, using their superior weapons and armor. The humans fought back with everything they had, but they were clearly losing. Zethkar watched as the defenders fell one by one. The old man took energy blasts to protect the medic, who continued treating wounded even as plasma fire exploded around her. The teenagers fought like experienced soldiers, covering each other's positions until the end. But it was the medic who truly amazed him. Her name tag read Phillips, and she couldn't have been more than 19 years old. As the Vorthak forces closed in, she continued working on a wounded soldier, even though energy bolts were hitting the ground around her feet. Phillips, Cooper shouted. Get to cover. Almost finished, she shouted back, wrapping a bandage around the soldier's arm. An energy blast struck the ground next to her, throwing her to the side. She got back up and continued working. Finally, only Cooper remained standing. He was wounded in several places, blood running down his face and arms. His weapon was empty, but he still held it ready. Around him lay his friends, his neighbors, his fellow defenders. Zethkar approached slowly, his own weapon raised. He expected to see defeat in the human's eyes, or perhaps fear. Instead, Cooper looked at him with something Zethkar had never seen before in a conquered enemy. There was no hatred in Cooper's face. No desperation or panic, just a calm determination that seemed unshakable. Go ahead, Cooper said quietly. Kill me. But there's a million more just like me, and we'll never stop fighting. Zethkar stopped walking. For the first time in his entire military career, he hesitated before making a kill. Something in Cooper's eyes made him pause. Why? Zethkar asked. Why fight when you know you can't win? Cooper smiled, despite his wounds. Because some things are worth dying for. Our families. Our freedom. Our world. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Cooper looked around at the bodies of his fallen comrades. These people didn't die for nothing. They died so their children might have a chance to grow up free. They died so someone else's family might escape. They died because when evil comes to your door, someone has to stand up and say no. Zethkar stared at the human sergeant. In all his conquests, he had never heard words like these. Other species fought for survival, for territory, for resources. But this human was talking about concepts that had no tactical value. Cooper reached for his sidearm with his last strength. Zethkar could have stopped him easily, but he didn't. He watched as the human tried one final time to complete his mission. Cooper died with his weapon in his hand, still trying to protect his world. Zethkar stood alone in the ruins of Grant Park, staring down at Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper's body. The smoke from the burning city drifted around him, and the distant sounds of battle continued. But for the first time in his long military career, he felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. His warriors waited nearby for orders, but Zethkar ignored them. He kept thinking about Cooper's final words, about the look in the human's eyes. There had been no fear there, only a determination that seemed to come from something deeper than survival instinct. Sir, Captain Vextar approached cautiously. What are your orders? Zethkar didn't answer immediately. Instead, he activated his wrist computer and began reviewing battle recordings from across the planet. He needed to understand what was happening here. The first recording showed Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos in Berlin. She had been defending a school when Vorthak forces surrounded it. Instead of surrendering, She had led a desperate charge that allowed 300 children to escape through emergency tunnels. She died buying those children time to reach safety. The second recording was from Sydney, Australia. Corporal Danny Mitchell had held a bridge single-handedly for 3 hours against overwhelming odds. He wasn't protecting a military target or valuable resources. He was protecting a convoy of refugees, families trying to escape the bombing. In Paris, Captain Steve Barnes had been ordered to retreat when his fighter squadron was outnumbered. Instead, he had flown his damaged aircraft directly into the shield generator of Zethkar's command ship. The explosion had disabled the vessel's defenses for crucial minutes, allowing other human forces to escape. Every recording told the same story. Humans fighting not just for victory but for each other. They displayed courage that made no tactical sense, sacrifice that contradicted every logical principle of warfare. But there was something else in these recordings that troubled Zethkar even more. The humans weren't fighting as separate individuals. They were fighting as one unified force, each person willing to die so others could continue the battle. "Sir," Vextar said again, "the fleet is requesting orders for the next phase of the assault." Zethkar closed the computer files and looked around the destroyed park. The bodies of human defenders lay where they had fallen, still positioned to protect each other even in death. The old man had died shielding the young medic. The teenagers had fallen while covering the retreat of wounded soldiers. What kind of species did this? What kind of beings chose death over surrender? Not for personal glory or military objectives, but for abstract concepts like freedom and protection of others. "Tell me, Captain," Zethkar said slowly. "In all our previous conquests, have you ever seen anything like this?" Vextar considered the question. "No, sir. Most species surrender when they realize they cannot win. Even those who resist usually do so for logical reasons, protecting resources, defending strategic positions. But the humans fight for their emotions. For love of family, for abstract ideals, for people they've never even met. Yes, sir, it's not rational behavior." Zethkar walked over to where the young medic had died. Katie Phillips, according to her name tag. She had been trying to save a wounded soldier when the energy blast killed her. Even facing certain death, she had continued trying to help others. "Captain," Zethkar said, "send a message to Admiral Thekmore. Tell him I need to speak with him immediately." "Yes, sir. Shall I tell him we're ready for the final assault?" Zethkar was quiet for a long moment. "No. Tell him there have been complications." 30 minutes later, Admiral Thekmore's face appeared on Zethkar's mobile communication unit. The Admiral looked pleased, expecting news of victory. "Commander, what is your status? Is Earth ready to surrender?" "Sir," Zethkar began carefully, "the humans are not responding as expected. They refuse to surrender despite overwhelming casualties. Then increase the bombardment intensity. Break their will to fight. That's just it, sir. The bombardment seems to make them fight harder, not weaker. Every city we destroy, every civilian we kill only strengthens their resolve." The Admiral's expression darkened. "Explain." Zethkar chose his words carefully. "They fight not as individuals protecting themselves, but as a collective force protecting each other. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation if it helps their species survive. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. Are you telling me that a primitive species is defeating the Vorthak Empire?" "No, sir. We can still win through pure firepower. But the cost..." Zethkar paused. "Sir, we've lost 20% of our ground forces in 4 days. If we continue this assault, we may lose half our fleet before they surrender." "Unacceptable losses," the Admiral agreed. "What do you recommend?" This was the moment Zethkar had been building toward. "Sir, I believe this planet should be classified as unsuitable for conquest." "What? On what grounds?" "The environmental conditions are too hostile for occupation. The native species carries unknown diseases that affect our troops. The resource extraction would be too costly given the resistance levels. All lies, but necessary ones." Zethkar couldn't tell his superior that he had been changed by watching humans die for each other. He couldn't explain that he now understood there were things more dangerous than superior weapons or tactical advantage. The humans had shown him something that challenged everything he believed about warfare and conquest. They had proven that a species fighting for love could be more dangerous than a species fighting for victory. "Very well," Admiral Thekmore said after a long pause. "Begin withdrawal procedures. Find us another target." "Yes, sir." The transmission ended. Zethkar looked around the battlefield one more time, then activated his communicator to address the fleet. All ships. This is Commander Zethkar. Begin immediate withdrawal from Earth orbit. We are leaving this system, sir. Vexstar looked confused. We're retreating? We're withdrawing, Zethkar corrected. There's a difference. As the Vorthak fleet pulled back from Earth, Zethkar returned to his quarters and began writing his official report. He documented the environmental hazards, the disease risks, the resource problems that made Earth unsuitable for conquest. But in his personal log, he wrote something different. Today I encountered a species that fights not for conquest or survival, but for love of others. They showed me that true strength doesn't come from superior weapons or larger armies. It comes from unbreakable bonds between individuals who would rather die than let their people suffer. I have spent my career conquering worlds by defeating their military forces and breaking their will to resist. But the humans taught me that some things cannot be conquered. Some spirits cannot be broken. Some bonds are stronger than fear. Captain Jake Morrison died ramming his ship into our forces to save others. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez died protecting wounded civilians. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper died defending his home and his beliefs. Each of them could have lived by surrendering. Each of them chose death instead, not because they were foolish or irrational, but because they understood something I am only beginning to comprehend. They fought not as individuals, but as one people united by something stronger than military discipline or imperial command. They fought with love. Years later, when the Vorthak Empire faced its own existential crisis from an unknown alien threat, Zethkar would remember the lessons he learned on Earth. He would teach his own people to fight not as individual warriors seeking personal glory, but as one unified force protecting what they cherished most. He would teach them that the strongest army is not the one with the best weapons or the most ships, but the one whose soldiers are willing to die for each other. The day he fought humans had changed him forever. He had arrived at Earth as a conqueror seeking another easy victory. He left as someone who finally understood what made warriors truly dangerous. Not the fear of death, but the love of life, and the willingness to sacrifice that life so others could continue living. The humans had defeated him not by winning the battle, but by showing him a better way to fight. And perhaps in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.